The silence of deep space broke as reality tore open like fabric. From the wound in the universe, 12 massive ships emerged, their hulls dark as the void between stars. The largest vessel among them stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its surface scarred by countless battles across 17 conquered worlds. This was the Void Talon, flagship of the Kithan Empire's most successful war fleet. Inside the ship's command center, holographic displays painted the room in cold blue light. Commander Drex studied the tactical readouts with predatory satisfaction. His elongated fingers, ending in razor-sharp claws, traced patterns across the control surfaces as he examined their latest target. The third planet of this unremarkable system glowed softly on the main screen. Its blue-green surface marbled with white clouds. The planet showed all the signs of recent human colonization. Electromagnetic signatures indicated primitive power generation, while orbital scans revealed agricultural settlements and mining operations scattered across 2 continents. Population estimates suggested approximately 50,000. Humans had established themselves on this world they called Haven's Rest. The name itself amused Drex. Soon it would be their final resting place. Intelligence reports filled his mind. As he reviewed what the Empire knew about these humans, they had achieved faster-than-light travel only recently, perhaps within the last century. Their technology relied on crude fusion reactors and chemical propulsion systems that seemed almost quaint compared to Kithan antimatter drives. Most importantly, they appeared to possess no significant military capabilities beyond basic defensive installations. The Kithan Empire had perfected the art of conquest over 3 centuries. Their strategy was simple and effective: identify primitive species, overwhelm them with superior technology, and incorporate their worlds into the ever-expanding empire. 17 star systems had fallen using these exact tactics. The humans would be number 18.Drex S second in command. A scarred veteran named Korath approached the command throne. His armor bore the marks of countless battles, and his left eye had been replaced by a cybernetic implant after the conquest of the Villani homeworld. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of certain victory. The fleet had spent weeks traveling to this system, following intelligence gathered by deep space reconnaissance probes. The humans had been expanding into this sector for less than 5 years, establishing small colonies on worlds suitable for their biology. Most of these outposts contained fewer than 10,000 individuals and possessed virtually no defensive capabilities. Haven's Rest represented the largest human settlement they had encountered, making it an ideal target for what the Empire called a demonstration strike. The complete destruction of this colony would send a clear message to other human worlds: surrender immediately, or share the same fate. As the Kithan fleet moved deeper into the system, passive sensors painted a detailed picture of human activity on the planet below. Thermal imaging revealed extensive agricultural zones where humans grew food crops in neat, organized patterns. Mining operations extracted common metals and rare earth elements from several mountain ranges. Transportation networks connected the various settlements, while communication arrays maintained contact with other human colonies. Everything appeared exactly as expected. The humans went about their daily activities with no apparent awareness of the death approaching from the void. Their orbital sensors, if they possessed any, were too primitive to detect the Kithan fleet at this distance. They would have, perhaps, an hour's warning before the attack began. Nowhere near enough time to mount any meaningful resistance. Drex activated the fleet-wide communication system, his voice echoing through the corridors of 12 warships. Battle stations were assumed throughout the fleet as thousands of Kithan warriors prepared for another easy conquest. Fighter squadrons performed final equipment checks while ground assault teams reviewed their deployment plans. The routine was familiar, almost boring in its predictability. The attack would follow standard Imperial doctrine. Fighter craft would establish air superiority and eliminate any defensive installations. Orbital bombardment would destroy major population centers and infrastructure. Finally, ground forces would secure strategic locations and process any survivors for relocation to labor camps. As the fleet assumed attack formation, Drex composed the traditional ultimatum that preceded every imperial conquest. The message would be transmitted on all human communication frequencies, giving the colonists one final opportunity to surrender. Not that it mattered. Whether they surrendered or resisted, the outcome would be the same. The Empire required this world for its strategic location and natural resources. The holographic display updated as the fleet moved into optimal firing position. Weapon systems charged to full power while targeting computers locked onto the largest human settlements. In the depths of the ship, thousands of fighters and assault craft prepared for immediate deployment. Everything proceeded according to plan. Drex allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he reviewed the tactical situation. His forces possessed overwhelming superiority in every category that mattered. The humans might have courage, but courage meant nothing against plasma cannons and antimatter warheads. They might have determination, but determination could not stop orbital bombardment from reducing their cities to radioactive glass. The transmission array activated, sending the Imperial ultimatum across the void to the unsuspecting human colony. Standard Imperial protocol demanded a response time of exactly 1 hour. If the humans chose surrender, they would be allowed to gather essential supplies before deportation. If they chose resistance, they would be eliminated without mercy. Drex expected the humans to choose surrender. Most species did when faced with the reality of Imperial might. The few that chose to fight rarely lasted more than a few hours against superior Kithan technology and tactics. Either way, Haven's Rest would be under Imperial control before the local sun set on its surface. The response came back much sooner than expected. Instead of the usual pleading for mercy or desperate attempts at negotiation, the human reply was shockingly brief. 3 words crackled across the communication array, transmitted on emergency frequencies to ensure every ship in the fleet received the message, "Come and take it." Drex stared at the words on his display, uncertain whether to feel amused or insulted by such defiance. In his experience, species that responded with bravado usually broke the fastest when faced with actual combat. The humans were apparently no different from dozens of other primitive races that had made similar boasts. Before begging for mercy, gave the order to begin the attack, confident that within hours, Haven's Rest would exist only as a smoking crater and another entry in the Empire's victory records. Dawn broke over Haven's Rest with deceptive beauty. The twin suns cast golden light across endless fields of grain that swayed gently in the morning breeze. Farm workers moved between the crops, tending to their daily routines as they had for the past 3 years since the colony's establishment. To any observer, it appeared to be another peaceful day in humanity's expansion into the stars. The illusion shattered when the first wave of Kithan fighters screamed down through the atmosphere. 12 sleek vessels dropped from orbit imperfect formation, their plasma cannons already charging for the expected massacre. Flight leader Voss had participated in 17 previous conquests, and each had followed the same predictable pattern. The primitives would panic, scatter, and die. Instead of fleeing civilians, the Kithan pilots found themselves flying into a nightmare. The moment their craft entered the lower atmosphere, hidden weapon systems throughout the colony came online. What had appeared to be simple agricultural buildings suddenly bristled with defensive turrets that tracked the incoming fighters with mechanical precision. The first Kithan fighter exploded in a ball of superheated plasma before Voss could even process what was happening. Anti-aircraft missiles streaked up from concealed launch sites scattered throughout the farming community. These weren't crude chemical rockets, but sophisticated guided weapons that adjusted their trajectories mid-flight to compensate for evasive maneuvers. 2 more fighters died in the opening seconds, as human weapons demonstrated capabilities that should not have existed. The colonists possessed military-grade plasma cannons and electromagnetic pulse weapons that tore through Kithan shielding like tissue paper. Worse yet, the defensive grid operated with coordination that suggested advanced computer control and years of careful preparation. On the ground, Lieutenant Korv led the first assault wave into what should have been a simple mop-up operation. His soldiers had expected to face panicked farmers armed with primitive tools. Instead, They encountered something that defied every piece of intelligence the Empire had gathered about human capabilities. The humans didn't run. They fought with a savagery that shocked veteran Kithan warriors who had conquered 17 worlds. Men and women who had been tending crops moments earlier emerged from hidden positions, carrying weapons that belonged in the hands of professional soldiers. Improvised explosive devices turned peaceful streets into death traps, while mining equipment had been converted into devastating weapons of war. A human female who appeared to be in her 60s stepped out from behind a grain silo carrying what looked like a modified plasma cutter. Before Corv could react, she fired a beam that sliced through his squad's power armor like butter. Her weathered face showed no fear, only grim determination as she moved to her next position with the fluid grace of a trained combatant. The colony's layout, which had seemed random and inefficient from orbital scans, revealed itself to be a carefully designed fortress. Every building had been positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, while underground tunnels connected defensive positions throughout the settlement. The humans had turned their entire community into a military installation disguised as a farming operation. Children who should have been attending classes emerged from basement shelters, carrying ammunition and medical supplies to adult fighters. Their movements showed training and discipline that spoke of months or years of preparation. These weren't civilians caught off guard by an invasion. They were soldiers who had been waiting for this exact moment, back in orbit. Commander Drex watched the tactical displays with growing alarm. His fighter squadrons were being systematically destroyed by defensive systems that shouldn't exist. Ground forces reported encountering resistance that felt more like fighting trained military units than subduing a farming colony. Casualty reports streamed in at a rate that suggested something had gone terribly wrong with Imperial intelligence. The humans employed guerrilla tactics that turned every corner into a potential ambush. They used their intimate knowledge of the colony's layout to appear and disappear like ghosts, striking at supply lines and communication nodes with surgical precision. Kithan soldiers who had conquered multiple star systems found themselves outmaneuvered by opponents they had dismissed as primitives. A disturbing pattern emerged as the battle continued. The human weapons weren't just effective, they were specifically designed to counter Kithan technology. Plasma frequencies had been tuned to disrupt Imperial shielding, while explosive charges had been calibrated to penetrate standard battle armor. Someone had studied Kithan military capabilities in extraordinary detail. The colony's communication array, which should have been among the first targets destroyed, continued broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Instead of desperate pleas for help, the transmissions contained tactical updates and coordination signals between different defensive sectors. The humans were treating this battle like a military exercise they had practiced countless times. As the local day wore on, what should have been a quick conquest turned into a grinding siege. Kithan forces found themselves pinned down in urban warfare against opponents who seemed to know exactly how Imperial tactics worked. Every standard assault technique was countered by prepared defenses that suggested years of planning and preparation. Most disturbing of all was the humans' apparent lack of fear. Veteran Kithan warriors were accustomed to enemies who broke under the pressure of Imperial might. These humans showed no signs of panic or desperation. They fought with cold efficiency that suggested they had been expecting this attack and had prepared accordingly. Lieutenant Corv, trapped in a firefight near the colony's central marketplace, transmitted a request for orbital bombardment. The situation on the ground had deteriorated beyond salvage, and only overwhelming firepower could break the human resistance. His own forces had taken 60% casualties against opponents who were supposed to be helpless farmers. Commander Drex considered the request while studying updated casualty reports. The attack was 12 hours old, and his forces controlled perhaps 10% of their objectives. Fighter squadrons had been reduced to half strength while ground units reported being surrounded and cut off throughout the colony. The humans had somehow turned a simple conquest into a military disaster. The defensive systems that protected Haven's Rest operated with sophistication that rivaled Imperial technology. Automated turrets tracked multiple targets simultaneously, while human operators coordinated their fire for maximum effectiveness. This level of military capability required resources and training that far exceeded what a frontier colony should possess. As night fell over Haven's Rest, the true scope of the deception became clear. The colony's power grid, which had appeared primitive from orbital scans, revealed itself to be a hardened military network capable of sustaining combat operations indefinitely. Hidden factories beneath the farming areas produced ammunition and replacement parts for the defensive systems. The humans had built what appeared to be a peaceful agricultural settlement, while actually constructing one of the most sophisticated fortress systems the Kithan Empire had ever encountered. Every aspect of the colony, from building placement to communication networks, had been designed with warfare in mind. The crops and livestock were real, but they served as camouflage for a military installation of extraordinary capability. Commander Drex faced a choice that no Imperial commander had confronted in living memory. His forces were being bled dry by opponents who should not have existed, using weapons that should not have been available to a frontier colony. The humans of Haven's Rest had somehow turned the Empire's own tactics against them, creating a trap that was slowly consuming his entire invasion force. The second day of battle brought something that chilled Commander Drex to his core. As he prepared to commit his remaining reserves to break the impossible resistance at Haven's Rest, the ship's long-range sensors detected ripples in hyperspace. Multiple contacts were approaching the system at speeds that suggested military vessels rather than civilian traffic. What emerged from the tiers in reality made every Kithan warrior aboard the Void Talon freeze in terror. 12 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with a metallic finish that seemed to absorb light itself. These vessels dwarfed anything in the Imperial fleet, each one larger than the Void Talon and radiating power signatures that defied explanation. The lead ship transmitted its identification as the TCS Retribution, flagship of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. The name alone suggested military capabilities that contradicted every piece of intelligence the Empire possessed about human technology. These weren't the primitive vessels that Imperial scouts had reported, but warships that belonged to a civilization far more advanced than anyone had imagined. Admiral Cross of the Terran Navy opened communications with a transmission that carried the weight of absolute authority. His voice remained calm and professional as he delivered an ultimatum that reversed the entire tactical situation. Kithan vessels, you have attacked our people without provocation. Surrender immediately, and some of you might live to see prison. The human fleet moved with coordination that spoke of decades of experience and technological advancement, beyond Imperial capabilities. Their ships adjusted formation with precision that suggested artificial intelligence systems of extraordinary sophistication. Weapon ports opened along their hulls to reveal armaments that made Kithan plasma cannons look like children's toys. Drex studied the sensor readings with growing horror as the truth became undeniable. Haven's Rest had never been a defenseless farming colony. It had been bait, carefully designed and positioned to lure the Empire into a trap of monumental proportions. The humans had deliberately created what appeared to be a vulnerable target, then waited for their enemies to take the lure. Every aspect of the colony's apparent weakness had been calculated deception. The primitive power signatures were generated by equipment deliberately configured to appear less advanced than it actually was. The agricultural operations were real, but they served as cover for a military base that housed some of humanity's most experienced warriors. The colonists themselves weren't farmers and miners who had been forced into combat. They were volunteers, veterans and special forces operatives who had chosen to serve as living bait in the most dangerous mission in human space. Their families believed they were establishing a peaceful settlement, while in reality they were preparing for a battle that would determine the future of human expansion into the galaxy. Intelligence reports scrolled through Drex's mind as he realized how completely the Empire had been deceived. Every piece of information about human weakness and primitive technology had been carefully crafted misinformation. Hidden observers had fed Imperial scouts exactly the data needed to make Haven's Rest appear to be an irresistible target. The human battle fleet closed to engagement range with movements that suggested their commanders knew exactly how Kithen tactics worked. These weren't desperate defenders reacting to an unexpected threat. They were predators who had been waiting for their prey to walk into a carefully prepared killing ground on the surface of Haven's Rest. The colonists dropped all pretense of being civilian farmers. Advanced power armor emerged from hidden caches throughout the settlement, while weapons that belonged on military starships materialized from underground bunkers. The defensive grid that had been bleeding Imperial forces revealed itself to be only a fraction of the colony's true military capability. The woman who had been tending grain the day before now stood in combat armor that incorporated technology beyond Imperial understanding. Her weathered hands operated control systems that coordinated planetary defenses with the approaching fleet. She wasn't a farmer forced into combat, but a retired admiral who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in human space. Children, who had been carrying supplies to defensive positions, revealed themselves to be young officers serving their first combat deployment. The colony's school had been a training facility where the next generation of human military leaders learned their craft while maintaining the illusion of civilian life. Admiral Cross transmitted tactical data to the planetary defense grid, linking orbital and surface systems into a unified network that encompassed the entire star system. The humans had transformed Haven's Rest into the center of a military complex that extended far beyond the planet itself. Hidden weapon platforms throughout the system came online, revealing the true scope of human preparation. The Kithen Empire, which had built its reputation on the conquest of 17 star systems, faced an opponent that had spent years studying Imperial tactics and developing countermeasures. Every standard Kithen strategy had been anticipated and neutralized by defenses specifically designed to exploit Imperial weaknesses. Commander Drex realized that his forces weren't facing a primitive species that had stumbled into galactic civilization. They were confronting ancient predators who had learned to disguise themselves as harmless prey, drawing their enemies close before revealing their true nature. The humans weren't new to warfare. They were masters of it who had chosen deception as their primary weapon. The tactical displays showed a situation that had moved far beyond salvage. Imperial forces on the ground were surrounded and outnumbered by opponents who had been preparing for this exact battle for years. The orbital fleet faced human warships that incorporated technology generations ahead of anything in the Imperial arsenal. Most terrifying of all was the realization that this wasn't humanity's full strength. The approaching fleet represented only a fraction of human military capability, a regional defense force rather than their primary battle line. If this was what humans considered adequate for dealing with a single Imperial war fleet, what weapons did they possess for facing larger threats? The communication array crackled with desperate transmissions from Imperial commanders throughout the system. Fighter squadrons reported being systematically destroyed by defensive systems that adapted to their tactics in real time. Ground forces requested immediate evacuation as human counterattacks drove them from positions they had fought hours to secure. Admiral Cross opened a final communication channel to the Imperial flagship, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Commander Drex of the Kithen Empire, your forces are surrounded and outgunned. This is your last opportunity to surrender. My people have shown you the courtesy of revealing our true capabilities. We will not show such mercy again. The human fleet assumed attack formation with movements that demonstrated perfect coordination between ships that had never operated together before. Their technology allowed instant communication and tactical coordination across vast distances, creating a unified fighting force that operated like a single organism. Drex understood that the Empire faced a choice between surrender and annihilation. The humans possessed overwhelming superiority in every category that mattered: technology, tactics, training, and most importantly, information. They had studied their enemies for years while remaining hidden behind a mask of primitive innocence. The trap at Haven's Rest represented more than a military defeat. It was proof that humanity posed a threat to every established power in the galaxy. If they could deceive the Kithan Empire so completely, what other civilizations had underestimated the true capabilities of these apparent PRIMITIVES. As the human warships moved into final attack position, Commander Drex began composing what he knew would be his final transmission to Imperial Command. The message would carry a warning that could change the course of galactic history. The humans were not what they appeared to be, and the Empire had made a fatal error in underestimating them. The space battle that followed shattered 3 centuries of Kithan military doctrine in less than 30 minutes. When the Void Talon opened fire with its primary plasma batteries, the energy discharge was visible from the planet's surface as streams of superheated matter lanced across the void toward the human flagship. The blast should have reduced any known vessel to component atoms. Yet the TCS Retribution absorbed the assault without apparent damage. The human response came in the form of weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves. Quantum torpedoes materialized inside Kithan shield barriers, bypassing defensive systems entirely before detonating with force that compressed matter into temporary black holes. The Imperial cruiser Darkblade simply ceased to exist, its mass converted to energy in an instant of brilliant annihilation. Admiral Cross commanded his fleet with tactical genius that incorporated real-time adaptation to enemy capabilities. The human ships moved through space with impossible grace, their inertial dampening systems allowing maneuvers that should have liquefied their crews. More disturbing still was their ability to predict Kithan tactics. Countering Imperial strategies before they could be fully implemented, the Terran vessels fought with coordination that spoke of artificial intelligence systems beyond anything the Empire had encountered. When Kithan fighters attempted to exploit gaps in the human formation, those gaps proved to be deliberate traps that channeled the attackers into overlapping fields of fire. Hundreds of Imperial craft died in seconds as human point defense systems demonstrated accuracy that approached mathematical perfection. Commander Drex watched his fleet die with growing desperation as human technology revealed capabilities that redefined what was possible in naval warfare. Kithan shields, rated to withstand the combined firepower of entire fleets, collapsed under focused plasma lances that adjusted their frequency in real time to exploit momentary vulnerabilities. The humans weren't just using superior weapons. They were using weapons that learned and adapted during combat. The Imperial heavy cruiser Stormhawk attempted to withdraw from the engagement, its commander recognizing the hopelessness of the tactical situation. Human pursuit craft that had been invisible moments before materialized around the fleeing vessel, their cloaking technology rendering them completely undetectable until they chose to attack. The Stormhawk's destruction came so quickly that its distress beacon never had time to activate on the surface of Haven's Rest. The final act of deception played out as human ground forces revealed the full extent of their capabilities. What had appeared to be desperate civilian resistance transformed into a coordinated military operation that demonstrated training and equipment beyond Imperial understanding. The colonists weren't just veterans disguised as farmers. They were elite special forces operatives who had spent years preparing for this exact scenario. The elderly woman who had been tending crops now operated command systems that coordinated planetary defenses with orbital assets. Her movements showed decades of military experience as she directed energy beams that could cut through Imperial battle armor like paper. The weathered hands that had appeared to know only agricultural work manipulated controls for weapon systems that incorporated technology generations ahead of anything in the Kithan arsenal. Children who had been attending school revealed themselves to be junior officers, serving their first combat deployment in the most sophisticated training program in human space. Their youthful appearance had been the perfect disguise for military personnel who possessed knowledge of Imperial tactics that exceeded what most Kithan commanders knew about their own forces. The colony's communication network, which had maintained the illusion of primitive electromagnetic transmissions, activated systems that allowed instantaneous coordination across interstellar distances. The humans possessed technology that made faster-than-light communication as simple as sending a text message, enabling tactical coordination that encompassed multiple star systems, simultaneously. Underground facilities that had been hidden beneath. Agricultural areas opened to reveal manufacturing capabilities that rivaled Imperial shipyards. The humans had been producing advanced weapons and equipment while maintaining the appearance of a simple farming community. Every aspect of the colony had been designed to support a military operation of unprecedented complexity. Lieutenant Corv, one of the few surviving Imperial ground commanders, transmitted desperate requests for extraction as his position became untenable. The humans had stopped pretending to be desperate defenders and were now demonstrating military capabilities that suggested years of planning and preparation. His forces faced opponents who knew Imperial tactics better than he did and possessed weapons specifically designed to counter every strategy in the Kithen playbook. The human counterattack swept through Imperial positions with precision that spoke of perfect intelligence and overwhelming technological superiority. Soldiers who had been hiding in basement shelters emerged wearing power armor that incorporated stealth systems, energy weapons, and defensive capabilities that rendered Imperial equipment obsolete. They moved through the colony with the fluid coordination of a unit that had trained together for years. In orbit, the remaining Kithen vessels found themselves facing an impossible tactical situation. Human ships could appear and disappear at will using cloaking technology that rendered them invisible to Imperial sensors. Their weapons struck with accuracy that suggested targeting systems capable of predicting enemy movements seconds before they occurred. Most terrifying of all was their apparent invulnerability to Imperial weapons, as if human defensive systems had been specifically designed to counter Kithen technology. The TCS Retribution closed on the Void Talon with movements that suggested its commander was toying with his opponents. Admiral Cross transmitted tactical data to his other vessels while simultaneously coordinating with planetary defense systems, demonstrating multitasking capabilities that exceeded normal human limits. The bridge crew operated their stations with mechanical precision that suggested cybernetic enhancements or direct neural interfaces with their ship's systems. Commander Drex realized that everything the Empire knew about warfare had become obsolete in the span of 30 minutes. The humans possessed technology that made Imperial weapons look like primitive clubs, tactics that anticipated every possible Kithen response, and most importantly, intelligence that suggested they had been studying their enemies for decades. While remaining completely hidden, the destruction of the Imperial battle fleet proceeded with mathematical inevitability as human weapons demonstrated capabilities that belonged in theoretical physics textbooks rather than on battlefields. Energy beams that could adjust their properties mid-flight, projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and defensive systems that seemed to violate conservation of energy laws. Most disturbing of all was the humans' apparent restraint. Their weapons could have destroyed the entire Imperial fleet in seconds, yet they chose to disable rather than destroy, capture rather than kill. This wasn't the desperate defense of a primitive species, but a calculated demonstration of superior capability by a civilization that possessed overwhelming military advantage. As the Void Talon's shields finally collapsed under sustained human fire, Commander Drex understood that his species had encountered something far more dangerous than another primitive race ripe for conquest. The humans were apex predators who had been hiding among the galaxy's sheep, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal their true nature. The final transmission from Admiral Cross carried the weight of absolute authority. Your empire made a critical error, Commander. You assumed we were prey. You never considered that we might be predators wearing sheep's clothing, and now you face the consequences of that mistake. The dying moments of the Void Talon stretched into eternity as Commander Drex fought against failing life support systems to complete one final task. Emergency power flickered through the command center while structural integrity collapsed around him, but the hyperspace communication array still functioned. With hands that shook from radiation poisoning and oxygen deprivation, he composed a message that would change the course of galactic history. The transmission burst through subspace toward the heart of the Kiffin Empire, carrying data that challenged everything the Imperial High Command believed about their place in the universe. Sensor readings, tactical analyses, and combat footage painted an impossible picture. Humanity was not the primitive species that intelligence reports had described, but something far more dangerous than any civilization the Empire had encountered. On the Kiffin homeworld of Vorthak, Supreme Commander Thane received the final transmission with growing disbelief. The data described weapons that violated known physics, defensive systems that rendered Imperial technology obsolete and tactical, coordination that suggested artificial intelligence beyond anything in the galaxy. Most disturbing of all were the population estimates that accompanied the military analysis. The human colony at Haven's Rest had contained 50,000 individuals. Yet they had fielded military capabilities that exceeded what most star systems could muster. If this represented a typical human settlement, then the species possessed distributed military strength that made them virtually unconquerable. Every human world could potentially house enough firepower to destroy an Imperial fleet. The implications rippled through Imperial intelligence networks as analysts struggled to reconcile the new data with existing reports. For years, reconnaissance missions had returned with consistent descriptions of primitive human technology and limited military capabilities. Now it appeared that every piece of intelligence had been carefully crafted deception designed to lure potential enemies into vulnerability. The tactical recordings from Haven's Rest revealed the true scope of human preparation. The colony's defensive systems had operated with coordination that required years of planning and installation. Underground facilities had manufactured weapons and equipment using technology that surpassed Imperial capabilities. Most importantly, the colonists themselves had demonstrated training and discipline that suggested a military culture of extraordinary sophistication. Admiral Cross had mentioned sheep's clothing in his final transmission to Commander Drex, but the metaphor understated the complexity of human deception. This wasn't simply a matter of hiding military strength behind civilian facades. The humans had constructed an entire false civilization, complete with fictional technological limitations and fabricated cultural characteristics, all designed to make potential enemies underestimate their true capabilities. The surviving Kiffin vessels that had escaped the massacre at Haven's Rest carried their own pieces of the puzzle. Their testimony described human weapons that adapted to enemy tactics in real time, defensive systems that seemed to predict attacks before they occurred, and most terrifyingly, restraint that suggested the humans had been holding back throughout. The engagement, long-range sensors detected massive human fleet movements throughout the sector as word of the battle spread. What had appeared to be scattered civilian colonies revealed themselves to be forward military bases as construction ships and warships emerged from hidden facilities. The humans weren't just defending their territory. They were preparing for expansion into regions previously controlled by the Empire. The strategic implications became clear as intelligence analysts mapped human colony locations against Imperial territory. Every human settlement had been positioned to control critical hyperspace routes, mining systems, or strategic choke points. What had appeared to be random expansion by a primitive species was revealed to be a carefully orchestrated campaign of territorial acquisition by military planners of extraordinary skill. Supreme Commander Thane faced a choice that would determine the Empire's survival. Traditional Imperial doctrine called for massive retaliation against any species that dared to resist conquest. However, the data from Haven's Rest suggested that humanity possessed military capabilities that made such retaliation suicidal. The humans had demonstrated their ability to destroy Imperial fleets while suffering minimal casualties. Themselves, more disturbing still, were the technological analyses that accompanied the tactical reports. Human weapons incorporated principles that Imperial scientists had dismissed as theoretical impossibilities. Their defensive systems operated using energy manipulation techniques that suggested mastery of fundamental forces beyond current Kiffin understanding. Most importantly, their artificial intelligence systems demonstrated capabilities that approached true consciousness. The realization that humanity possessed such advanced technology raised terrifying questions about their true origins and intentions. If they were capable of building weapons that surpassed Imperial capabilities, why had they spent decades pretending to be primitive farmers and miners? The level of deception required to maintain such an illusion suggested patience and planning that spanned generations. Intelligence reports from other sectors began to arrive as the Empire's vast surveillance network focused on human activities throughout the galaxy. The pattern that emerged challenged every assumption about human expansion and capabilities. Colonies that had appeared to be struggling frontier settlements revealed themselves to be sophisticated military installations. Trade routes that seemed to follow economic logic actually formed a strategic network that could support rapid military deployment. The humans had been preparing for this confrontation for decades, possibly centuries. Every aspect of their apparent civilization had been crafted to support a military strategy of unprecedented complexity. They had allowed the Empire to study them, gather intelligence, and plan attacks, all while preparing defenses specifically designed to counter Imperial tactics and technology. As reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy, the true scope of human capabilities became undeniable. They possessed technology that made Imperial science look primitive, military organization that exceeded anything in known space, and most importantly, the patience to execute plans that span multiple generations. This wasn't a young species stumbling into galactic civilization, but ancient predators who had been hiding among their prey. The economic implications alone threatened to destroy the Empire's carefully constructed power structure. Human colonies that had appeared to be marginal agricultural settlements were revealed to be manufacturing centers that produced goods, using technology generations ahead of Imperial capabilities. Their apparent trade relationships were actually intelligence networks that had been gathering information about every major civilization in the galaxy. Within days of the battle at Haven's Rest, human diplomatic missions arrived at Imperial border stations carrying offers of peace and cooperation. Their representatives spoke with the confidence of victors who could afford to be generous, offering technological exchanges and territorial agreements that acknowledged humanity's position as the dominant power in the region. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The Kithan Empire, which had built its reputation on the conquest of 17 star systems, now found itself negotiating with a species that had revealed itself to be far more advanced and dangerous than any civilization they had encountered. The humans had achieved their objectives without firing a shot at the Imperial homeworld, using deception and misdirection to position themselves as the galaxy's new apex predators. The farmers of Haven's Rest returned to their fields, their work as bait complete. They tended their crops and raised their livestock as they had before, but their true nature was no longer hidden. They were soldiers of humanity's invisible army, guardians of a secret that had reshaped the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Their greatest victory wasn't the destruction of the Imperial fleet, but the revelation that humanity's true strength lay not in their weapons or their technology, but in their ability to make their enemies believe they were nothing more than harmless prey until the moment they chose to strike.